Hi, I'm David Singleton. I'm founder and partner of L2 Fluency along with Paul May. Welcome to January's Greek Peek. In the world of translation, making word choices in a modern language for words in an ancient language is not as simple as finding one word equivalents. Word selection is a process that has to account for several factors. Something as simple as moving from the usual meaning to a nuanced meaning can alter a word's understanding. However, many times choices are made because a confluence of factors converge to change a meaning. The passage of time is one factor that changes the lens translators see through. How cultures react to the same stimulus can also alter how a word is translated. And whether a translation or version precedes or succeeds milestones in the advancements of science can amend how an idea is viewed. The starting point for deriving meaning is nearly always a word's semantics in a given situation. But time, culture, and science also operate as constraints in addition to the usual starting place. Next, other influences are considered to see if they supplant the immediate setting. The translator must filter in and filter out various meanings for different scenarios and then act as a puppet master for words. Verses 33 and 38 of John 11 contain two phrases that show the process of choosing a meaning. One choice is based on immediate setting within the chapter. The other choice is derived from meaning outside the chapter. One great illustration for going through the options, nuances, and constraints for making an accurate word choice is found in the story of Lazarus in John 11. The process of selection, though complex, begins with word semantics in the immediate context. By the time one reads the chapter to verse 33, the setting has been stated and the trip to Bethany has happened. Jesus waits on the road near Mary and Martha's house. Martha hears Jesus is resting on the road close by and goes to meet him. She returns from their short conversation and tells Mary that Jesus wants to see her too. So Mary goes to the road with a group of friends and then on to Lazarus' tomb. In the course of the conversation with Mary and Martha, a phrase in verse 33 surfaces that reflects Jesus' reaction to what both of them had said to him. The same phrase comes up again in verse 38 after Jesus hears the sisters' friends echoing Mary and Martha's wish for him to have arrived earlier to heal her brother. This reaction prompts Jesus to pray that God would show all those around him the Father's glory so that they would believe that God had sent him and to finish what he had come to do. The phrases to remember from the two verses are "embrimesato to pneumati" in verse 33 and "embrimomenos" in auto in verse 38. The verses read, Jesus therefore, when he saw her weeping, and they having come with her Jews weeping, he was disturbed to the spirit, and it unsettled him. Jesus therefore, again being disturbed in himself, comes to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone leaned against it. Over the last 3 centuries, the word for Jesus' reaction has not been translated in any kind of standard way. That, of course, raises questions. What follows is the process of finding an accurate meaning. Imbrimesato and imbrimomenos are both forms from the same verb embrimaomai and were used by the Greeks in two main ways. One, for the snorting sound a horse makes when it is being disturbed, or the whinnying, nickering sound when it dislikes the actions of people or other animals around it. And two, for the way a person reacts to something, with a disturbed, troubled feeling about what has been said or done. So, what would be the modern English equivalent for the two synonymous phrases disturbed to the spirit and disturbed in himself? Do the sequence of events already outlined lead to the right phrase to use? Mary and her friends demonstrated their mourning through crying, which in turn led Jesus to cry. This resulted in Mary's friends saying that they wished Jesus had been there to heal Lazarus before he died. That's when Jesus was disturbed to his core, and he became unsettled. One of the principles people use in translating is to keep a perceived theme in a given context. In this passage, the theme is a funeral. Some would argue that this setting generated great feelings of warmth, care, understanding, and compassion. So they translate in Abrime Sato accordingly with words like deeply moved in spirit, as found in the New International Version and Revised Standard Version. Touched, found in the Good News Translation. Or deeply stirred in spirit, as found in the New Testament for Everyone. The perceived theme portrays Jesus as having a gentle, tender side, because the funeral setting among friends would require it. Others show a very different side to Jesus here and translate in Abrime Sato as anger or indignation. The idea is found in the New Living Translation, the Message, the Living Bible. These translators focus on the lack of Mary and Martha's understanding of the concept of resurrection of dead souls as the reason for Jesus' anger. Again at the tomb, when Jesus saw the Jews weeping over something that he had control over and was about to give his life for, he was angered a second time. Still others look at the whole scene of the funeral, the mourning, and the sisters' lack of understanding, and translate Abrime Sato as sadness. The mourners at the tomb certainly took Jesus' tears to mean sadness, because he was demonstrating a deep love for Lazarus. If his spirit had been moved or touched from sorrow, then certainly it would have precipitated weeping. Jesus' being caught up in the moment and weeping would rule out a reaction of anger or indignance. However, the setting of Jesus going to Bethany to raise Lazarus from the dead resides within a much larger narrative, and the macro setting necessarily bears on the way the theme is presented and maintained throughout its presentation. John frames the passage as having happened at the beginning of Jesus' last week on earth. To say Jesus didn't know what would unfold during that week would be a gross misunderstanding, for he knew in his inner being that his mindset could absolutely not give in to his weaker nature. He knew he would square off against the mighty Jewish leaders in Jerusalem, where they had the most influence, as found in Matthew 16:21. He had to set his face toward going to Jerusalem. Jesus started his week before appearing at Lazarus' tomb, already troubled. Luke says in advance of going to Bethany, Jesus prayed for people to see that God had sent him because he didn't see a lot of faith around him. Then once in Jerusalem, he saw the leaders' hypocrisy and cleaned the temple with a whip, saying the leaders had made a travesty of God's house, found in Luke 19:45 through 48. He condemned those same Jewish leaders in scathing comparisons and declarations, using the very word hypocrite throughout the chapter of Matthew 23. These events showed how disturbed Jesus' spirit was, so much so that by Thursday night in the Garden of Gethsemane, he sweat blood and pressed God for a change of plan, asking if his cup of suffering could pass before his trial started. These are in Luke 22:39 through 44. Yes, Jesus showed every sign that he was troubled inside. And Jesus had to have known that raising Lazarus would have merely added fuel to the fire for the leaders who wanted to see him dead. John, in fact, recorded the Jewish leaders' actions against Lazarus in chapter 12, verses 9 through 10. So when John used in Abrime Sato, he was using it as the Greeks usually used it. There was no need to use a nuanced meaning of the word to match the immediate setting of the funeral because the bigger picture portrayed Jesus as being disturbed within. Just before coming to Bethany to raise Lazarus in Luke 18:8, Jesus had told a story to illustrate that one should never lose hope when praying to God. Knowing his last day on earth was very near, he added a question to this story. Would there be faith on the earth when he returned? Because he could not see people's faith in God or him. He knew how important that faith would be once his execution had taken place and persecution of his followers had begun. Asking Mary and Martha about the key to their faith, that he was life, and belief in him would give them life, once again triggered the reaction to make him question where they stood. Seeing the Jews around him at the tomb, mourning as if the dead were merely dead, was his tipping point into exasperation. How to translate Jesus' reaction wholly depends on how a person views what dictates his reaction to the funeral scene and the conversations in it. It would seem that the funeral is not the main factor. The immediate setting of the funeral in Bethany is not strong enough to insinuate that one should abandon the Greek's normal usage, that is, disturbed, in favor of using a term more emphatically, such as anger. Sadness would not be assigned the meaning either because it doesn't cover Jesus' disappointment with the conversations with Mary and Martha. Being moved doesn't work well because it lacks specificity as to what emotion Jesus was experiencing. But a cluster of words do align themselves with the notion of disturbed, exasperated, displeased, disquieted, troubled, or piqued. Any of these words seem to better fit the way to understand the Greek phrase John used. The cluster of words is in full accordance with the events Jesus encountered during his last week as he faced the Jewish leaders' vehemence, scheming, and scorn. Jesus' emotion from his conversations with Mary and Martha before raising Lazarus seemed to echo the question he had asked just prior to coming to Bethany, "When I return, will there be faith on the earth?" Luke 18:8. And when he saw and heard from the fellow Jews mourning with Mary and Martha about Lazarus' needing to be alive to be restored to life, made him disturbed to his core. He was exasperated enough to raise his eyes to heaven, to say to God that he knew God would hear him when he asks of him, so that when the miracle happened, they would believe that his Father had sent him. John 11:42. As a young Christian, I fell into Mary and Martha's category of misunderstanding the idea of life, the misunderstanding that disturbed Jesus to his core. I was not looking forward to my departure from the life I knew on earth. Thankfully, God refined my understanding by sending a series of events to mature my faith, so that now, faced with the matter of leaving this world, my response is quite assuredly that God sent Jesus, who came to give us life and something very extraordinary, beyond what people trapped on one sun's orbiting planet can ever fathom or imagine. I can understand so much more clearly what Jesus told Martha. I am life. The one believing in me, even if he dies, will live.